also in front of Yeshua. Yod, Shin, Vav, Ayin. Yod is the first in front of in his name as well. And it means something constant. What is more constant than our God? Than our Christ, than our Messiah? Jesus is our constant. He's the constant, because anyone who is willing to give up his life and not accept in any form anything which smacks of idolatry, listen to this, is called a Yehudi. A Yehudi, or a Jew, is one who is not willing to bow to other idols and other gods. That's the whole meaning of what it means to be, ultimately to be a Jew. The name Mordecai from the ancient language means warrior and one who declares God to be one. God to be one. And this is what, now we're going to look at Shammai. Remember it said that Mordecai was descended from son of this, son of that, from Shammai. Who's Shammai? Shammai was a member of the Sanhedrin living in the days of David Amelech, David the king, King David. Shammai is a contemporary with King David. Now we're going to discover something about Shammai. This is not in the book of Esther, by the way. He got mad with King David. He became angry because he was assaulted, that his family lost the monarchy. Now we remember that, that when after Saul dies in battle with his son Jonathan. And we know that Samuel anoints David to be king. But there are other contesting families and people who wanted the throne along with David at the time. And one of them was this family of Shammai. And at a low point in David's life, Shammai curses David Amelech, and he's pelting him with rocks and cursing him. Well, Jewish law, halakha, says if you insult the king publicly, off with your head. David says, Hashem, he says, no, wait a minute. I'm not going to kill him. I'm going to let my son deal with him. But here's what he says. He says, I want these words to be said. Later on, David instructs Solomon, Shlomo his son, to carry out justice. He says to make sure, though, now you're going to carry out justice. You're going to deal with him. You're going to execute him. But make sure that before you do, it is done, that he has established a family before you do it. Make sure he's established a family. Why? Because David, he's not a prophet, but he was, David was close to God, all right? And David even was given prophetic words. We know David even prophesied of Jesus, right? So we know that. But David prophetically knew that there would be a future time for the Jewish people when they would be in a very precarious situation, and that the descendant of Shammai would be the one to save them, and this is Mordecai. So, who gets credit for Mordecai's existence? David the king. The Gemara goes further and says, why Shammai? Because God listened to his prayers. Shammai is from the Hebrew word shema, means to hear. Listen, hear. Hear was right. And finally, he's called Kish. He's descended from a man by the name of Kish. Hakish means to bang on doors. So he pounds on the gates of mercy, and the gates of mercy were opened to him. In other words, Mordecai was a man of faith, and he didn't take no for an answer. Mordecai was some might call him the first children's church leader, the first VBS leader, because he brought 22,000 children to the gates of Susa and taught them the Torah. Isn't that interesting? He was a great Torah teacher. Well, here's our beloved friend Esther, Hadassah. Of course, we don't know if that's the artist's rendition for it. Who wrote the book of Esther? Question is. Ibn Ezra, one of the rabbis, says in his commentary, none other than Mordecai. Now, personally, I've heard rabbis say Esther wrote it, and I've heard say Mordecai wrote it. Here's what I believe. They were both very, not only spiritual people, they were both very literate. Very literate, very intelligent. I believe they wrote it in collaboration with each other. I believe they both wrote it. All right. The book, Story of Esther, represents a time when the Jewish people will be called upon to determine the end of history. I'm going to show you something from history. We're going to jump ahead into the future, into the 16 and then into the 1700s. That kind of relates to this, all right? It involves two other kings, a French king and a German king. First, the French king. In 1656, the French philosopher Blaise Pascal. Blaise Pascal was a famous French philosopher, mathematician, and a man of God. He was a Christian. In fact, Blaise Pascal, the famous French philosopher and mathematician, is quoted as saying this: "There is at the heart of every man a God-shaped vacuum that cannot be filled by anything but God himself." Blaise Pascal said that. And Pascal publishes the first of his letters, Lettre Provinciale, and he did not radiate the anti-Semitism typical of so many European intellectuals of his day. Over 300 years ago, when King Louis XIV of France asked the great French philosopher to give him proof of the supernatural, Pascal answered, "Why, the Jews, Your Majesty, the Jews." The best proof of the supernatural that Pascal could think of was the Jews. And now we're going to go forward about 100 years. Maybe less, but right around that. In Germany, Frederick II of Prussia lived from 1712 to 1786. And as the King of Prussia, he became known as Frederick the Great. He lived in an age of skepticism, and one evening he called out to those in his court, and he says, "Can anyone give me a solid argument for the existence of God?" And the king's chaplain replied, "The Jews, Your Majesty." He approached the chaplain, the Marquis d'Argennes, and asked him, "Can you give me one single irrefutable proof of God?" And the Marquis says, "The Jew." In fact, the full quote is, he says, "It's the Jew, Your Majesty." In fact, this guy says, actually, this is what he says: "The Jew, Your Majesty, he's the barometer of God's things to come." That's what he said. In the Gemara, it talks about a man named Tapunoi who asked the sages questions and asked them, everything has to be in the Torah. It has to be there, right? All of Jewish history has to be there, including Purim and Mordecai himself. Well, it is. Esther's name is in Torah, in the first 5 books. Here's where we find it. "But I will surely hide my face in that day because of all the evil they will do." This is God talking, or Moses talking, or Moses writing down what God did. "For they will turn to other gods." Deuteronomy 31:18. The term "hide my face" in the Hebrew is haster aster, Esther, proving Esther was predicted in the Torah. Mordecai took Esther for his own daughter. Now, real quick, who is Mordecai to Esther?
Father.
Uncle.
No.
Cousin.
First cousin.
All right.
I can read it right out of the book. Yes, first cousin.
Yes.
Now, much older cousin, but cousin, first cousin. Now, it was customary at the time for people to marry in these families. We know for a fact he took Esther in and took care of Esther. There are those that actually believe in the rabbinic community that he marries Esther. You say, well, wait a minute. The king took all the virgins from the, to become the wife of they went around getting the virgins. With that king, it didn't. I will tell you something right now, and we know this because we know about what was going on. The king didn't care if you were married or not. That king didn't care. You're supposed to get virgins, but he didn't care. Now, there is a good possibility she was married to Mordecai. I'm not saying for certain. I'm not saying doctrine, making doctrine out of this. All right. But how do we know there's that possibility at least? I'm going to show you something else in the Scripture. In Torah, in the first 5 books about Moses. We're going to learn about what was going on with him. And Amram took Jochebed, his father's sister, to wife, and she bare him Aaron and Moses, and the years of the life of Amram were 130 and 7 years. This is out of Exodus 6:20. Jochebed and Amram, the mother and father of Moses, were aunt and nephew. Jochebed was the aunt of Amram. And they had Moses, and they had Aaron, and they had Miriam. They had Mary. Okay? So, again, I think that, at least it's plausible that there was marriage there, but we don't, again, not going to make doctrine out of it. Hadassah. Her name in Hebrew was Hadassah. Hadassah. Now I'm going to show you what her name actually means, but remember, Hebrew letters actually symbolically have meaning, and there's a message in that meaning. There's a message in the meaning. Hadassah, when you take these letters, that each letter has meaning, here's the message: the knowledge of giving and worship. The dalet, or the da part there, da means in Hebrew to know intimately. Yada, it's the root of yada, which is to know intimately. All right. The knowledge of giving. There's another hay of giving in worship. Samach, worship. But also connected to worship. What do we have here? The samach also means the ascension of the spiral to God's glory. The ascension of the spiral to God's glory. So, the gift of ascending the spiral of God's glory takes us through the portal. And of course the portal, the door, who called himself, I am the door. Jesus. So this thing all has to do with worship. Her name is about worship. Hadassah means, this is the actual meaning of it. We'll get down here at the bottom. Fragrant dancing beauty that restores and makes new. Fragrant dancing beauty that restores and makes new. Hadassah has a beautiful aroma, and that her life was actually an aromatic life. All right? She's called Hadassah because she had a sweet aroma, but a bitter taste. Hadassah is a myrtle. It means myrtle. Myrtle is a beautiful tree. Beautiful branches, beautiful fruit, or beautiful looking flowers, I should say. The flowers are beautiful on the myrtle, beautiful looking tree, but the berries, they're bitter. All right? Well, how does that go along with her life? Myrtle has a sweet fragrance that the berries are bitter. How does that relate to our friend Esther? Well, first of all, Mordecai. For Mordecai, it was wonderful. All right? The beauty of Esther is wonderful. For Haman, he bites into Esther and it didn't go well for him. He experienced the bitterness of it. She's not like the Ezrig. The Ezrig we talk about at the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Sukkot. The Ezrig has a beautiful aroma and a sweet and beautiful taste. The Ezrig actually represents in this Feast of Tabernacles Jesus. Because the tree, the citron tree or the Ezrig tree, is ever bearing fruit throughout every season. It bears fruit. It bears fruit through all summer, spring, winter, fall. And Israel gets winters even like we do in Jerusalem. You've seen the pictures. And they got a record snow this year. Yeah. But in that record snow, those Ezrig trees were bearing those citrons over there. Can you imagine that? But they were. All right? It's an amazing, amazing tree. But not so with the myrtle. The myrtle has a bitter fruit. Like Esther, she's soft and tough at the same time. That's the message about Esther. She's soft but tough at the same time. Now the Medrash says, God saying, you cried that you were orphans after the temple was destroyed. And God says, the Redeemer I have sent to you will also be an orphan. Who was the orphan? Esther was an orphan. Her father Abigail and her mother died. She was an orphan. The story of Esther unfolds before us. Before reading the scroll, the reader unrolls the entire parchment, revealing the whole Megillah. And in Hebrew, the verb unroll is goyal, which is akin to the verb to reveal, which is galas. You can see the similarity into reveal and a scroll right there in those words. Okay. God is always present, but is hidden in what appears to be the natural courses of events. Miracles that come clothed with natural processes. Divine providence not clothed in shades of nature. And yet it's still divine. And it's still miracles. And it's still supernatural. It's just that we don't have the same... It's not a bird like it was going on with the Jews in Egypt and at Sinai, where there was, this big, supernatural horn that's shaking the mountains and the earth and a sea that splits in front of them all. It's not like seeing God in that kind of a sense. And yet it's still full of miracles. This is a season of miracles, just like Passover was a season of miracles. This, Purim, is also a season of miracles. And even when Esther was away, she was loyal to Mordecai. When Esther was taken away, she never forgot who she was, like Joseph in Egypt. Remember we talked about him with Passover. And the lack of background that she was adopted, where Esther was concerned, was not going to ruin her chances to become the queen. Why? Because Ahasuerus, the king, didn't look for nobility. He wasn't looking for lineage. You know, she wasn't a royal. Well, in one sense, all the children of Israel were descended from Abraham, right? There's a sense in which they were royal. Because what does God even say of his people? It includes all of you and all of us, whether Jew or Gentile. You're a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Okay. So in that sense, but in the natural sense, she wasn't a royal. She wasn't a royal. But he don't care about that. He cares about what gratifies him. He cares about that. Yeah. And he cares about his own sensual pleasures. Here it is. She's nobody's princess, yet she's everybody's princess. Esther's going to be the people's princess. Remember, Princess Di was called the people's princess?
Princess Diana.
But she's the people's princess. Every nation's going to say of Esther, she's ours. The Greeks are going to say, she's a Greek. The Babylonians are going to say, she's a Babylonian. The Chaldeans are going to say, she's a Chaldean. Now, we're going to look later on how this is going to apply to something when there's a party, another party the king has for Esther, and how that has meaning to that. The Gemara says it was like a beautiful painting, had 1,000 people look at it, and everybody liked something different about the painting. Esther had spiritual beauty as well as she was a righteous woman. She, listen to this, she found favor in the eyes of men and God. Who is it to talk about also 500 years later who had favor in the eyes of men and God? The Lord Jesus, yes. She wasn't looking to make herself most beautiful and most attractive. Now, in the movies, you know, it has her really like she's trying to get this king to like her and all this stuff. But in reality, she didn't care about that. All right? That movie, by the way, The One Night with the King, you know, great acting, great story, but it was not even scripturally or historically correct in some of the things that were in there. She wasn't trying to find favor in Ahasuerus' eyes. All right? Her father, Abigail, was a tzaddik, a righteous one. When I use the word tzaddik, that means a righteous person, one who cares about, and the righteous in Jewish understanding is this. It's one who cares about being just and cares about really reaching out to people in love, with the love of God. That's a righteous person. Esther had her father's traits. She had the traits of her father's righteousness. She had her father's personality, his spiritual virtues. But Mordecai is going to help to create this Esther. He's going to help to develop or unfold the incredible virtues that Esther naturally possesses. Mordecai will help Esther become who she should be. Now, my wife and I, Ruthie and I, have a favorite artist in history. Michelangelo Buonarroti, the famous Michelangelo, who's credited with such artistic renderings and works as David, the sculpture of David, the Pieta, Jesus holding, or Mary holding Jesus, and then the famous Sistine Chapel with with God, touching man at the creation, things like this. Incredible artist, all right. But this is actually what Michelangelo is quoted saying about his creations, his work. He said, "In every block of marble I see a statue as plain as though it stood before me, in shape and perfect in attitude and action. I have only to hew away the rough walls that imprison the lovely apparition to reveal it to the other eyes as mine see it." Okay, just have to beat away. He saw the beauty in it, and he just knocked away all the... that's really what God does with us.
Yes.
Think about it. God sees us, what? In a perfected state. God sees us as beautiful. God doesn't make junk. He isn't in the junk business, Steve.
Right.
He really isn't.
It's in the diamond business.
He's in the diamond business.
Yes.
Jewels.
He chose her for her personality, meaning the king chooses her. He chooses her because of the fine qualities that she possessed. He did, But this king didn't care about those things. He pickled people for 12 months in myrrh oil, and he didn't care about their personality. He just wanted them to be happy, willing, and ready, and pretty and clean, and that's it. It's all skin deep with this king. It's remarkable that such a hedonist, and that's what he was, such a selfish person, was taken by Esther's charm. So, he's going to have a party. He's going to throw a party for Esther. Why does he throw her a party? Now, he's a party king. Remember, he's a party animal. He's a big $180-day party. Then he has another 7 more days of a party. Now, he's going to have another party. The Bible even says, he even calls, it's right in the book Esther, he calls it the Esther party. Okay. He says, have an Esther party. Why does he have the Esther party? The Esther party is to get her to confess or to admit where you come from, your true identity, who you are. I want to know, where are you from? Who are you? All right? So thinks, okay, I'll go out there and I'll get one of these old Jews that, they're not really Torah observant, and they're, get one of these Jews, and they'll give her up. They'll stab Mordecai in the back, and they'll give her up. And when there was a backstabbing Jew who said, she's a Jew, Ahasuerus says, yeah, right. The Greeks are saying she's a Greek, and the Babylonians say she's a Babylonian, Chaldean. Yeah, everybody's Jewish. Great, everybody's Jewish. So after Esther becomes queen, the king throws her a great big party. We just looked at that. So now we're going to go on. Now we're going to look at Haman. Haman.
Oh, that's the hat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, tradition says he wore a 3-cornered hat, like a pirate hat or like a colonial soldier hat or something like that. He wears a 3-cornered hat. And see this little thing on him here? History also says, and these ancient chronicles that say he wore, and this is going to be very significant. You're going to find out something very important about this. He wore this thing around his neck that was an emblem, and what it was a god. It was a pagan god. They call it in Yiddish Getchka. He had this Getchka, or this emblem of this god that he wore around his neck. Why is that important? Because when Mordecai doesn't bow down to him, it's connected to that. We're going to look at that. All right? Haman wanted to destroy the spiritual existence of the Jews by destroying all mention of the Torah, its commandments, and their observance. Haman wanted to kill the Jewish spirit, the spark that exists in every heart of every Jewish soul, binding the nation together culturally. He wanted to destroy everything godly about the Jew. Now remember, a couple hundred years later, there's another guy who's actually an Antichrist. Haman was an Antichrist spirit. All right? And this other guy, remember, was the king of Greece, was the Greek king. All right? Antiochus Epiphanes. Remember the story of Hanukkah. And he got a little more aggressive with the Jews about it, but he didn't want to kill the Jews either. He wanted them to compromise and give up their special relationship with God and destroy the spirit of what it means to be a Jew. It means to be a person of the book. All right? But Haman went beyond that. Haman said, we don't just want to do this. We want to get rid of them, period. We want to get rid of any remembrance of these people, period, and wipe them out. He walks around with this little idol around his neck, this little getchka, and Mordecai says, now here's the thing. Here's the difference between a person, the character of a man like Mordecai and the character of Haman. Mordecai says, I want to be myself. Haman says, there's nobody else but me. Difference. So Joshua, now, here's what we're going to look at next. Who's Haman? Haman he's called an Agagite. He's actually a descendant of a character by the name of Agag. Agag was the king of the Amalekite nation at the time of Saul. Now, who are these Amalekites, you ask? Amalekites are actually people that came from they're Edomites. All right? And who are they? Esau. They're from Esau. We're going to talk about this more tomorrow night, too. Esau married a daughter of Ishmael. Esau marries a daughter of Ishmael, Arab, and out of that marriage between Ishmael or Ishmael's daughter and Esau, we get Edom. Who else in history was an Edomite? Herod the Great. The Herod that wanted to kill all the babies when Jesus was born.
Okay.
That's that, and that spirit. Okay. Amalek. All right. We're going to find out. I want to mention one of the things Amalek represents tonight, but you want to be here tomorrow night because you're going to find out some other things that Amalek represents. It's very, very significant. What this spirit of Amalek is. It's the Antichrist spirit, but you're going to find out some interesting things about it. Joshua overwhelmed Amalek with and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this in a book as a memorial." This is Exodus 17. In a memorial and recite it to Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar and named it, "The Lord is my banner." And he said, "The Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war against Amalek from generation to generation." Now tomorrow night you're going to find out something very interesting. We're still battling this Amalek spirit in the earth today. And in particularly, they were battling it in the last century at the time of Hitler. And I'm going to show you something tomorrow night that's very, very significant about Germany connected to this. Very significant. We're not going to look at it today. We have time tonight, but tomorrow night we're going to look at it, along with some other things. Amalek is the arch enemy of Israel and the arch enemy of every human being. Amalek is the little voice that comes to you. I got a typo there. Little voice that comes to you and says, "Who are you kidding? You're a failure." One of the famous rabbis, Nachman, in history says that this is the worst enemy. That the worst enemy is your enemies are your friends who tell you you won't be able to do it because they know you so well.
And family.
That's Amalek.
Yep.
That's Amalek. You know what Amalek is telling us? He's saying, face it, you really think the world one day will be paradise? Look at them trying for so many thousands of years and it hasn't worked, it didn't work, it hasn't worked. And Amalek is telling me the same thing about God also. Forget it, don't waste your time, it won't happen. So what's Purim about? Purim is about celebrating it will happen. And on Purim, we're living on the level that it's happened already. It's happened already. When the Jews were invited to the king's party, they ate food forbidden to them that was not kosher. And the very first time Haman appears in the Bible, in the Torah, in the first 5 books, is when God is punishing Adam and Eve from transgressing his second commandment of eating from the tree of good and evil. Well, where is it? You said, where in the world's Haman in that? Okay, here it is. Was it from, this is Genesis 3:11, was it from the tree from which I had forbidden you to eat that you ate? Now here it is in the Hebrew. What are those words and how does it go? Hamim, ha'etz, asher, siutik, livriti, akal, maminu, akalat. But what's the first word? Hamim. Haman. The same word. Haman. There it is. The phrase "was it from" in the Hebrew is Hamim, which can also be read Haman. Haman's power comes from people eating of the forbidden fruit. It comes from radical, not only disobedience, but rebellion. This is what it is. What it comes down to. It's Antichrist. What it is. Amalek only has power over us when we doubt the Almighty. The Hebrew word for doubt is safek. There it is. Samak pei kuf. And it equals 240. Amalek, okay, which is the letters in Hebrew. I don't have them like I do up here, but these are the letters. Ayin, mem, lamed, kuf, also equal up to 240. Okay, so there's a connection. So Amalek is a spirit of doubt, but it's more than doubt, we're going to learn. It is doubt, though. Now we're going to look at God himself. God who is in the book, he's not written in the book of Esther, he's not in the book, and yet he's all through it. He's there. He's just concealed. He's hidden. Well, here I have this picture. Yodevavi, there's God, there's his hand. Remember the hand, the significance of the hand. I will cause them to know my hand and my might, and they shall know that my name is Jehovah, Jeremiah 16:21. And the rabbis were afraid that if they put the name of God in the Megillah or in the book of Esther, the Persians would invoke their pagan gods. This is the reason why it wasn't put in there, at least in the natural, why it wasn't put in there by Mordecai and Esther, although, and then Ibn Ezra says that because Mordecai knew that his writings would be copied, and that because he knew that every time he writes God's name, there would be the name of a deity or a pagan idol replacing the name of Hashem. By the way, this book was the most popular book, like we have these popular books now in our culture. You know, somebody writes the best novel or whatever. This was the most popular book at the time of Queen Esther in ancient Persia. And he didn't want to cause the names of the status of the idols to be raised, so therefore Mordecai omitted the name of Hashem altogether. Well, in the natural, this all happened like that, but God was also directing it and didn't want it there, but yet he's all through there. Divine providence is this, when God is hidden, but God says, he's hidden, but he says, I want you to find me. Remember, Proverbs 25:2 says, it's the glory of God to conceal, but the honor of God to search out a matter. Now here's in Isaiah. This is in the prophets. This is before. This is 400 years before Esther. 400 years before Esther. Isaiah says, truly you are a God who hides himself. O God of Israel, Savior. That word Savior in Hebrew is Yeshua, Jesus. Jesus, right there, he's in there. Isaiah 45:15. Doesn't say God's presence is not there, but that it's concealed. Even in the height of the darkness, even in the depth of the concealment, he's always with us. This is the overriding message of the Megillah, the book of Esther. When he says in the Torah, watch out, I'm going to hide. It is to tell us, I exist, even if you do not see me, and I hide only so that you will look for me. I hide only so that you will look for me. I'm not saying that I don't want to be found. I'm not saying I hide so hard that you can't find me. But he says, I'm hiding because I do want to be found. I do want to be found. All right? And he expects us to look for it. God tells the Jews that after Moses and the prophets, it's your job to find me now. And the Torah refers to the hand of God at least on two occasions. The first time, it's called the Yad Hazukah, the strong hand. And the second time, it's called the Yad Gedolah, the big hand. Okay? Where do we find these scriptures? Exodus 13:14 is where we have the strong hand. Exodus 13:14. I won't read it right now for the sake of time. But Exodus 15:6 is where you find the big hand. All right? The hand of God. Comes along and our rabbis say that we are going to celebrate the 14th day to allude to the big hand, the Yad Gedolah, God's great big hand. My wife and I remember the book she read about heaven, and it was about called God's big angels. A little girl that went to heaven and saw these big hand, God. Now Purim. There are some things in here that are incredible that we're going to look at Purim itself and what this is all about. The Jews at the time of Esther faced total annihilation. The rabbis say that we are a sed ben shiva matzehu, one small sheep surrounded by 70 wolves. 70 wolves of the 70 nations. After God dividing the nations according to the number of children of Israel that came into Egypt with Jacob and his family when Joseph was in Egypt. That's where we get the 70 from. And at the end of the 70-year exile, most of the Jewish people did not go back to Israel. Most of the tribe of Levi didn't go back, but rather stayed in Babel. And the story of the grandson of the Rebbe, this is a cute little story that kind of illustrates the point here. The story of the grandson of a famous grandfather rabbi, I hid, but my friend didn't even come and look for me. You know, the little boy saying, but Grandpa, I hid and my friend didn't even come to look for me. And Grandpa says, he started to laugh and said to the child, you see, it's exactly what God says. I hide, but no one comes to look for me. This is the prime lesson of Purim. In the darkness, in the shadows, in concealment, even in the persecution, even there I exist. I am there. What does David say in the Psalm? You make my bed in hell, I am there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Jewish existence is not according to the laws of nature, but because of the providence of God. Remember when I showed you earlier, we talked about how the Jew, that the proof that there is a God. You know, there's all these proofs that can be disputed about the existence of God that they've come up with. You know, and Christians will sit there, and people will try to, or Christians or Jews will sit with somebody who is an atheist and say, well, you know, there's a God, and all these different proofs, and they'll give all these different. They're great proofs. You know, they can even be spiritual. They're just awesome proofs. And you can debate just about every one of them, but there's one that's not, you can't even argue it. And that is this. How did a people, 4,000 years of Jewish history, who were the smallest of the people, remember what God said to him? He said, I didn't choose you because you were the greatest, because you were the smallest. And yet systematically, kings and emperors have tried to wipe out this people group who's the smallest and haven't been able to do it, and they always come back. If that doesn't prove there's a God, nothing does. Because according to the laws of nature, there really shouldn't be. We really shouldn't be here. Shouldn't be here. Now, we commemorate this all-encompassing salvation in 4 ways. These are the 4 things that are done over the season of Purim. We observe an additional mitzvah, which is the reading of the book of Esther to celebrate our spiritual salvation. To mark the continuance of the Jewish spirit, we have a commandment to rejoice, to feel gladness in our hearts. And because of the physical existence of the Jewish nation was spared, we celebrate in a physical fashion by feasting and drinking. And lastly, as the property of the Jewish people wasn't plundered, and it wasn't, like in Israel, actually the Jews, remember at the time of the Exodus, they plundered, they took all the... And if you read the story, and you read what it says right in the Scripture, in the account of Esther, you know, they didn't lose anybody. You know, and it says in there that the peoples who were supposed to go out and wipe them out, it says that they were all terrified of. They were terrified of, which is reminiscent of what went on back, remember, with Joshua, when they crossed, remember, when they crossed over. When you read that account in Esther, think back to Joshua, when they crossed the Jordan, and remember what Rahab said to the spies that went up there?
Hearts were failing.
Yeah, hearts were failing. We were terrified when we saw you come across there. Yeah, same kind of a thing. And, okay. So here's these things. These are the 4 mems, the 4 M's of Esther that they will do. The book of Esther. The book of Esther is read twice, once in the evening and again in the morning, and they call it the Megillah. The Mishloach Ma'anot is when we send different portions of food to our friends. We send different portions of foods to our friends. Mishloach Ma'anot. Also Matanot Leviyonim. We give charity to needy people. It's a time of sending of charity to the needy. And also it's a mishteh, which is we have a festive meal during the day, replete with great wine, so it's a time of great drinking and eating. And interestingly enough, Purim was a fast before a feast, remember in the account, and Yom Kippur is a feast before a fast. Remember we said Yom Kippur and Purim, how they... Okay. Now, furthermore, the Hazam Sofer writes, another one of the famous rabbis, as we do not want to embarrass the poor. Now, this is what I think is so special here in this whole thing in Judaism of what they do. We do not want to embarrass the poor. The rich give the poor gifts, and the poor give rich gifts to the rich. All the members of the nation of Israel give indiscriminately to their brothers and sisters. Why? So all can celebrate Purim properly without any shame. That, to me, is noble. That is noble. These days of Purim should never cease among the Jews, nor shall their remembrance perish from their descendants. The Jewish year begins with the joy of the redemption of Passover, Pesach, and concludes with the joy of the redemption of Purim. So the message here is that joy breaks through all barriers. Ruthie, joy breaks.
Yeah.
Amen.
The name of your ministry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Joy breaks. Remember we said that pur in Hebrew meant to break or to crush. All right? Now the letter kuf in Hebrew means monkey. Kuf. There it is. Spelled out. And the symbol of that means mother-in-law too. No, anyway. And the symbol. Glad this isn't taped up. And the symbol of laughter of the month of Adar. It's a symbol of laughter. Remember Isaac. Sarah called her son Isaac, meant laughter. Okay, symbolized by this kuf, this monkey. In accordance with the idiom, as a monkey in the face of man, the kuf also symbolizes a masquerade, an accepted custom of Purim. This is the time of year when actually they have, in Judaism they have a costume party, like at Halloween, but this is a godly costume party, okay? And they have, and what they do is they'll wear these different outfits and they'll wear masks. The whole point of the wearing of the mask is the mask represents Esther and God, how that they were hidden.
Yeah.
Hidden at this time. All right? Purim is about going against logic, being counterintuitive. Logic says you bow down to the guy and get it over with. In other words, talking here about Haman, when Mordecai, remember Mordecai was riding around on his big horse and he was the big cheese up there, and Mordecai was supposed to bow down to him, and he didn't. All right? Now, according to Jewish law, you bow down to a prince out of respect for their office. That is according to Jewish halakha. You are allowed to do that. So why didn't he do it? Remember what he was wearing? He was wearing the getchka. He was wearing the idol. He was wearing the god. He looked up and said, I'm not going to bow down to that. That's why he didn't bow. All right? Now, here's this word akida. The word akida in Hebrew, we find also, this is a word that goes back to Abraham. Remember Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac at the on the mount, actually the holy mountain, Mount Moriah, the holy mountain of God, was called the Akida, the sacrifice of Isaac. We're going to discover this term also is used here again connected to Purim. Akida Neshama, a sacrifice or a binding of the soul which is beyond logic. So there might be loopholes allowing us to bow down. Technically the king's orders were not to bow down to hominids as a deity. Just bow down out of respect. And by acting counterintuitively, they were able to bring out or demonstrate the highest part of the soul, which is the Akida. And there's these 10 attributes of the soul. We're not going to get into what that is, that are considered logical. But the essential attribute that transcends or goes beyond logic is called the Akida. The Akida essentially is this obedience, this because of this knowing of the character of God. I'm going to do something even though it goes against the grain of what is traditionally thought or taught or this or that, even within my religious belief, I'm going to do it. You got to understand something. When Abraham, what Jewish law was, you don't kill innocent blood. You know, Abraham was told to do something. But Abraham was willing still to do it. That kind of, really the essence of that whole concept of the Akida is a knowing of God. Of having that kind of heart where your heartbeat knows the heartbeat of God. The Jewish people, man, woman, and child, willing to follow Mordecai, were able to reach the Akida despite the Hester, the darkness. This concept is called Mesiras Nefesh, the self-sacrifice, or the Akida. Self-sacrifice. Do something out of obedience simply because God commands it, even though it's illogical or not super rational beyond reason. There was a man. Now, this man's mentioned in the Bible. But according to Hebrew tradition and historical accounts, this thing isn't in the Bible. But you're going to see how it's a very interesting thing goes on. And it doesn't in any way detract from what actually happens in the Bible. It actually goes along with it. Nachshon Aminadab of the tribe of Judah jumps into the sea. This was a guy living back at the time of Moses with the people of with the children of Israel when they went across the Red Sea. And what happens is Moses gets out, stretches his arms out, and of course through the power of God, the sea splits. But according to this tradition and this story is that when this Nachshon Aminadab of the tribe of Judah, when it actually splits, he goes out into the water, and it goes up to his waist, neck, and mouth, nostrils, and he can't breathe anymore, and he keeps going, and then the sea opens. Nachshon Aminadab has always been the symbol of self-sacrifice. Now here's what's interesting about it. Reuben doesn't jump in. The time of Moses. The children of Reuben don't jump in. Why? Reuben means to see. They have to see it to believe it. Simeon or Shimon, he means to hear. Hear, O Israel. That's a good thing. But you have to hear about it for it to make sense. Levi has to do with the idea of goodness. Toidli has to be good for me. I have to sense the goodness. But what about Judah? Judah, the fourth tribe, is Hoadah, which is praise and acknowledgement. I admit I don't understand it, but I admit to it. The faith factor. The faith factor. He jumps in. All right? And after that, the waters part. Every holiday, in every Jewish holiday, you have to be filled with joy, with the exception of Purim. We know these different holidays connected with joy, right? Tabernacles and Hanukkah, all about joy. But with Purim, you have to be actually drunk with joy.
Yay!
The mitzvah is to become inebriated. Now,
Have a party.
there's a lot of even Messianic Jews who don't like, or Messianic Gentiles, the Jews, I don't know about that, who don't like to even look at this whole thing of Purim because of it, and they think of it being, and there's actually a Seder you do with Purim. Like there's a Seder you do with actual Rosh Hashanah as well as Passover. Because it's the commandment, you want to eat and you want to drink yourself, and you want to drink and get drunk. But what the Lord showed me about Purim and about the commandment to drink, and what this whole thing's about, is Purim is a second Pentecost. It's Shavuot. It's like that. Purim is about the drinking in the Holy Spirit. That's what Purim's about. We're going to find out about that. With Purim, you have to be drunk with joy. The mitzvah is to become inebriated. Now, drunkenness has to be so high that you absolutely do not know the difference between good and evil. Here's what they say: you're so drunk you don't know the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordecai. That's how drunk you are. All year long, you think the highest thing is to know good and evil, because all year long we're still hung up on the tree of knowledge. In Purim, I don't want to know good and I don't want to know evil. I only want to know Him.
Yay!
Now I know this in one sense, this is out of the box and maybe out of the box to you, and doesn't make sense and go along with maybe some. But listen, when you hear me out with this stuff, when I tell you this, I show you this. I want to know Him. Here's the script: Jeremiah 24:7, Jeremiah 31:34, and Philippians 3:11. You guys know these scriptures. Here's Jeremiah 24:7. I will give them a heart to know me, for I am the Lord, and they will be my people, and I will be their God. For they will return to me with their whole heart. And see, that was why it was a completion of what happened at Sinai. Here's Philippians 3:10. Here's our friend Paul. I love Paul. He's somebody I want to really meet. I really love Paul. Paul's awesome. That I may know Him, and the power of His resurrection, and the fellowship of His sufferings, be me conformable unto His death. But the key here is that I may know Him. The God knowledge, which comes down to us on Purim, when you are drunk, it's a different kind of knowledge. It's a completely different kind of knowledge. It's so deep, and according to our tradition, this kind of depth didn't even come down to us on Mount Sinai. On Mount Sinai, God gave us the 613 laws, and it's all beautiful. But on Purim, I'm going even deeper than that. It's not just a do and don't do, but an unbelievable revelation of God's love. An outpouring of love. What is that love? It's the holy fire.
Yes.
That love is the holy fire that is from the heart of the Father.
Yeah.
The heart of the Father. And Kat Kerr, one of these people that we've talked about before in here, says that she got the revelation when she was in heaven with the Lord of what the stones of fire were, when she said the stones of fire were what was in the heart of the Father.
Yes.
All right. The fire of his love. The holy fire. Holiness is really about the fire of his love. That's what it is. The fire of his love. And comes, and knowing that is knowing, again, has to do with the heart of the Father. It's all about the heart of the Father. Romans, Paul says, "Oh, the depth of the riches book, the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out." On Yom Kippur, I'm fasting and standing before God, confessing all my sins. On Purim, I'm giving gifts and I'm drunk. And that's higher than Yom Kippur? Yeah, it is. On Purim, I'm so glad to be in the presence of God. The essence of Purim is this. There was an old hymn a lot of you guys know from your old hymn times. Right? Fanny Crosby, Blessed Assurance, Jesus mine. In one of the verses, she says, filled with his goodness, here's the essence of it, here it is. Lost in his love.
Yes.
John 17. That they may be in us and we in them, that they would be one. John 17 is really the Lord's Prayer, and that is the heart of the Father, and that's being lost in his love, and that's the essence of what we're talking about. Zamora says Yom Kippur is a little bit like Purim, but not really. On Purim, I'm not saying anything. On Purim, I'm not saying anything bad about myself. On Purim, we're sending gifts to each other, not face to face. Why not face to face? Now, this is the custom and the tradition. I am sending gifts to you to let you know even that part which you are hiding from me, I give you strength in it. I'm giving you strength to that part you think you have to hide. On Purim, God opens the deepest, deepest gates of heaven for us. Portals. On Purim, any poor man who holds out his hand, you have to give him something. And this is one of the most beautiful parts of this teaching. This is why I didn't want you to miss this. Listen to me. According to Hebrew tradition, when I hold out my hand, listen to this, in giving, when I hold out my hand to someone in giving, God takes a hold of my hand.
Yes.
Let me show you this. This is what I mean. Right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
There it is. On a throw from MC Connections. Oh, we love MC Connections, right? Oh, my. Okay. But to me, that is so profound and that's so beautiful right there. That is so beautiful. But there's an even more profound thing we'll look at later. On the other holidays, God gives us joy. God gives us freedom. God gives us Torah. But on Purim, God gives us his hand. On Purim, I'm not even learning. On Purim, I'm so busy sending out gifts. On Purim, I'm drunk. What does it mean to be drunk? Drunk is learning beyond my head, beyond everything in this world. Purim is the utmost fixing of the tree of knowledge. What's a tree of knowledge? I know that this is good and this is bad. What's the tree of life? It has nothing to do with right or wrong, good or bad. There it is, John 17. The tree of life is being in him. Okay, what's wrong with the tree of knowledge? Don't you have to know what's right and what's wrong? And their knowledge of good and bad didn't come from their head. So there was so much deeper, so much deeper. This is talking here about what happened at Pentecost. This is talking here about what happened with Adam and Eve before the fall. Okay? But I'm showing you right here. Before the fall. So much deeper, so much deeper. But the knowledge from above, if I'm connected to the highest place in heaven, sometimes you learn something, and you know that you know it, but it doesn't touch you. Yet sometimes you hear one word, and it reaches you to the deepest depths. Anything which does not touch you, and I don't mean here by, an emotional kind of thing. I mean, touches your spirit. All right. Anything that does not really touch your spirit, man, is from the tree of knowledge. On Purim, I'm so glad that there is one God. On Purim, we're lost in His love, as I talked about. I choose you. I'm yours. I love you. Okay. Remember, at Sinai, it was about God reaching down to man. Purim is about man reaching up to God. All right. God reaching down to man. Man reaching up to God.
Good.
Star of David. Of course, there's a lot more to it than that, but the story of one. I don't have to play this yet tonight. I think we have a group of people here that'll. I'm going to put that song on tonight. Story of only one big barrel of beer. This is the story, okay? And only one big guy standing there drinking beer, and nobody could get close to the beer. And the Rebbe or the rabbi says to him, "But there's other people also who would like to have a glass of beer." And the big guy says, "Yeah, but you cannot get drunk when somebody else is drinking." So the Rebbe got very serious and said, "You know something? It's not true. If you love another person, you can be drunk from seeing someone else drink."
Spirit. In the spirit.
Mm-hmm. We've experienced that in our marriage. We've experienced sometimes when you see somebody who's in the spirit, right?
Yeah.
Drunk in the spirit.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Now they have this custom. Remember, this was one of the four mems, or the four M words that's connected to this custom things they do at Purim, where they give gifts to the poor, and they call it shlachamones, sending gifts to the poor. On Purim, all the rabbis tell us one thing. When you send shlachamones, when you send gifts to the poor, to another person, all right, you can taste what the high priest felt when he walked into the Holy of Holies. When you really give out of your heart to someone, whether it's a friend or a poor person, they say it's like walking into the Holy of Holies. Holy has the opposite of unholy. Beautiful has the opposite of ugly, but the Holy of Holies has no opposite. You know there is something so deep that when I send you a gift, I'm not sending it to that part of you which is holy. I'm sending it to these deepest depths of you, which is the Holy of Holies. And on Yom Kippur, only the high priest walks into the Holy of Holies. What are we called? Priests.
Priests and kings.
That's right. King of priests. I could be the biggest schmender. That's the biggest, goofball the whole year long. It's a Yiddish word there, schmender. But on Purim, I take an apple, I take some schnitz pie, and a piece of cake, and I give it to my best friend, and at that moment I can taste of the Holy of Holies. Remember the hay. The hay is a very holy letter, but the Gimel is also a very holy letter. The Gimel is the third letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It equals the number 3. And the Gimel actually represents Hesed, which is one of the most powerful words representing the love of God. The power of God's love demonstrated. Because what's the Gimel? The Gimel, let me show you this real quick. I can show it to you better on this. Okay, in the alphabet, I can do this pretty quick here. You have the alphabet and the gimel. Over here's the aleph. All right. Here's the bet. And then you have the gimel. And the next letter is the dalet. The gimel is the man running to this guy here, the dalet. Who's the dalet? Dalet represents the door, but it also represents the one impoverished spiritually, the poor person spiritually, the unsaved. The gimel is the one, it's the spirit of, it's the gospel. He's running to give the good news
Yeah.
to the world out there, to the man who needs to hear it, to the woman who needs to hear it. This is the gimel. This is what we got. Here's Purim. Here's the word Purim in Hebrew. Purim. Pei, Vav, Resh, Yod, Mem, Saphi. There's Purim. If you switch the letters of that around, you get the word. They get this thing here. And bullocks, the bulls, is Eupharim or Upharim, which stands for the Lord's power and strength. The Lord's power and strength. Why am I bringing that up? Because the message of Purim, one of the key messages of Purim, is reaching out in love and having that. And one of the messages of Purim is being lost in His love. And that's also connected with the baptism in the Holy Spirit and being drunk in the Spirit, where we're lost in Him, all right? And when we're in Him, and that to that extent, that's a place of power and strength. That's a place of power and strength, all right? The lot cast was destroy, slay, and wipe out all Jews, which was the final solution. The final solution. The time of Haman and the Persians and Mordecai and Esther. The first mitzvah, the first commandment, that word means commandment, given to mankind is the opposite, antithesis is opposite of the final solution. What is the first commandment given to mankind?
Be fruitful and multiply.
Yes. Be fruitful and multiply. Genesis 1:28. Well, here it is. Vayireka otam Elohim vayomer lechem Elohim Peru urevu. All right? In that is the word Peru. All right? Peru is to be fruitful. And Peru is in Purim. The Pur, when you take those letters and you put them around the opposite, is the lot which is the perversion of the divine decree. The perversion of the divine decree is to eliminate, to depopulate, to wipe out. Go against the first command, which is to be fruitful and multiply. God put that wisdom in His language. Man didn't put it there. God put it there. It's the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. God's Spirit put it. It's there. It's in the language. Oops, that's it. Okay. Now.
Great. Yes. Yes.
Now, I know that was a lot of stuff there. Is there? Now I gave you those cards or notebook paper. Do we have any questions or comments or anything? I was going to take the questions and comments.